Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. Now I get asked a lot about multiple databases or multiple DB contexts in Entity Framework Core or now Entity Framework 7. And for that, I prepared something because I think the big question is, or what the intention behind this question is, most of the time is that you have a users database maybe, and you want to use users from that database in, well, other tables, other databases, and have a relationship between these entities in the end, right? So for instance, I created this little example here, and I want to show you how Entity Framework is doing that. And quick spoiler, I know with that you might want to close or stop this video. It is not possible with EF7 for now to automatically handle relationships between entities of multiple or several databases. Okay, this does not work. And I just want to show you why and what Entity Framework is actually doing and how you can do that manually, because in the end you have to handle these relationships manually. I totally get it, and we're using this as well at work. So that's how you could do it, in my opinion. So, but first, this little example here, not that much code typing here along with me in this example, but again, let me first explain what the situation is. I have a user entity or a user model and a character model, right? So users, I think you get the idea here. You have an ID, a name, probably also an email address, password, and so on, but this is just a tiny example. And every user can have a list of characters, all right? And now the character looks like that. Again, also an ID, a name, maybe some hit points, and then also regarding the relationship, the user ID. So this is a one-to-many relationship. One user can have many or several characters. And if you would use only one database with two tables in there and you want that relationship, then this would totally work like that. So again, one user, many characters. And we could already run our migrations if, of course, you configured everything else you need to configure. And if you are looking for a tutorial about multiple DB contexts in Entity Framework, then I hope you already have some experience with Entity Framework and maybe code-first migration in general, how to configure this. But real quick, what you typically would do is you need a connection string, of course. So here I've got two because of the multiple databases. I've got a user connection, user DB, trust connection true, and trust server certificate is also true because of Entity Framework 7. And then also a character database, pretty much same stuff with SQL Server Express on my local machine. So a user connection and a character connection. Now regarding the NuGet packages, I also added Entity Framework Core SQL Server and Entity Framework Core Design for code-first migrations. This is necessary. And then I've got already two database contexts, all right? So here's my user DB context. Pretty boring, actually. It inherits from a DB context or derives from DB context. And we've got the typical constructor with the options parameter and this one DB set. So this will be our table, users. And then regarding the characters, pretty much the same stuff with the characters table. And then the last thing you have to configure is here in our program, CS file, builder services at DbContexts. I think you know this. And then use SQL Server if you want to use SQL Server, and then the connection string for the user connection, and then exactly the same thing for the character connection. So this is pretty simple actually, and you can do this with hundreds of contexts if you want, right? But the big question is now relationships. So again, we have the character with the user ID here, but as you can already see, there's no user object here as well, right? And here now in the user entity, we have the character class here. There is this relationship. So now what I can do is, and you can see it in the history because I tried this several times. So let me just clear this real quick. We can actually write .NET EF migrations and then, for instance, add initial. And again, if you would only have one database context, then that's everything you need. But since we now have several contexts, Entity Framework will also tell you that you have to specify the context. All right, so this is the first thing you have to think about. So there it is, specify which one to use. more than one DB context was found. All right, so in that case now we can write dash dash context, and let's start with the character context. So character DB context it is. Again, just to have a look, there it is, the character DB context, right? And this was done really quick. We have a look here, we get our typical migrations folder, initial create, and here now it would create our characters table. That's nice, right? With an ID, name, hit points, user ID, no foreign key whatsoever. That's fine because we haven't configured or added the navigation property for the user, right? So this is totally okay. But now what about the user DB context? So let's say we add user DB context for the context here, initial create, and then migration file is created. You see that it creates another folder. I don't really like that because, well, it would be great if Entity Framework would also create a character DB folder. And if I would do it in the other way around, so first the user DB migration, then the character DB migration, then I would get a character DB folder. Okay. It works, I guess. And now here's the big problem. We have the users table, that's nice, but it will also create a character table. And this makes total sense, of course, because we have the relationship configured with that navigation property, all right? So again, when we go back to the user model here, this tells Entity Framework, all right, so I have to create the character table as well to make this relationship possible, to make this work. Although in the user DB context we haven't specified this database set. Again, it also works if you only have one context. So the big conclusion in so far is that Entity Framework has no idea where you want this relationship to be, and you can't configure it as far as I know. If you know something else, then please tell me that in the comments below and I will create another video and do that. But as far as I know, there is no way to handle a relationship automatically between two contexts. All right, so we have this, well, this migration file, and it would create the character table in the user database. And this is not really what we want, right? With the foreign key and so on. Great stuff. Again, if you only have one DB context or only one database. So what I want to do is I want to remove everything regarding the migration files. And then actually this is fine because now we only have the character and that's okay. But now what we have to do, I know it's so simple in essence, but we just have to remove the navigation property. And this means that we have to handle the relationships manually in the end. So when we now run this again, you know what will happen. We will simply get a users table with an ID and a name as the columns. So here again, this folder. And now it creates the users table, great, and also then the characters table. So I would say we just run these migrations or update the database. So .NET EF database update, and then again, when I run this, it should tell us that we have more than one DB context, great. So now context user DB context, great. And now the same thing for the character. Awesome. So now let me open SQL Server Management Studio. We have our databases here, character DB, user DB, time tracker is from my .NET Web Academy. So please ignore that, but you can check out the link in the video description, of course, if you want. So now the user, nothing in here actually, of course. We've got our migrations history, but again, only for this context. And then same thing in essence here. So now the last thing I want to show you is, well, how would you now get the relationship between these entities? Well, we just add something here. So in our users table, we've got the user Patrick, for instance. Okay, I did a little mistake. So let me fix that real quick. That's actually pretty nice, because with that you see how to make a change. So migrations, add name fix in the context user DB context. All right, let's double check. Yes, we could lose some data. There is the migrations file. This one actually. All right, and update the database. Now here, refresh. Okay, this looks better. Did I use the correct types here? Yes, this looks okay. So now we're back, and now I enter this automatic ID. Perfect. So now here we can say, I don't know, we have Joel, for instance, with 100 hit points. And now here I have to set this manually. So whenever we have a post request, for instance, in our web API, when you're using a web application here, we would have to grab the ID from the currently authenticated user with the help of the JSON Web Token, for instance, something like that. Did some videos about that, of course. And you can also learn all that in the .NET Web Academy and in my Udemy courses, of course. So maybe you want to have a look in the video description. Thank you very much for that. And here, another character. Also this ID. And that's also a great character, maybe with 200 hit points. Why not? So now we actually have that relationship, but we do not really have it, right? So because this user has the ID 1, and this these characters have to set the user ID here. And again, I know it feels strange to tell you that, but it's really simple, and I think you know that. But I just want to answer this question here, clarify this big question mark that many of you have. How would you actually realize that kind of stuff here with a web API, SQL Server, and Entity Framework? Now the big question is, how would you just fuse these two entities? Well, let's first create a controller, like a character controller maybe, which is an API controller, of course. So here now the character controller, that's the one. And here now we inject both database contexts. So first, private read-only, the user DB context, maybe user DB context. We generate the constructor, and again, pretty much the same thing here. Character DB context. Actually, would be faster to just type it and not copy and paste that. But anyways, nope, I didn't want that. Please just insert this thing, add parameter. Yep, that's the one I was looking for. All right, so now let me just create the get method here. So HTTP get it is public async task get, or get characters. All right, and I would now just assume that we have an authenticated user. We have, for instance, here something like that, the authorized attribute, right? But again, not in this tutorial. And then from the HTTP context, we get the token, and from that, then probably the user ID. So no parameter here. I just assume the user ID would be 1. So what we can now do is, if we want to get the user object together with the character objects, we can, of course, first get await user DB context users where, or not where, first async, and then the ID actually. So U for user, and then maybe 1. All right, and this now will be our user. And then additionally, let's get the characters, and well, characters await, not all characters, but where then the character user ID equals user ID, right? Something like that. So now to see really a difference, let's say we've got another character here, another user, and that would be simply the test user. I know, very creative today. And here now we've got Luigi. Have you seen the Mario movie? I loved it. I really thought this was a great movie. Is this how you spell Luigi? Yeah, just checked it. All right. Okay. So this works. And now here, again, combine this because maybe you want something as I had earlier with the user model, and then here was the list of the characters. Well, I think you know this already. We can create a DTO, of course, right? So for that, let's just say we have a new item, and this would be our, I don't know, the user response DTO, for instance. And here now we have also the user ID. Yeah, let's just call it ID. And then here we have the name again. And this can actually be a record struct. So let's make this a record struct. All right, so here now we have the ID, we have the name, and then the list of characters. Call this characters. All right. And now here we say var result is a new get, not get, yeah. Maybe I should give this a different name. But here now we have the user ID, the user name, and the characters list. All right, something like that. Of course, you could improve that. Maybe you don't need the user ID. Maybe you want to remove something from the characters list, and so on. For instance, we don't actually need the user ID from the characters objects here, but I think you get the idea so far. And in the end, what you want to return is simply actually an action result with a user response DTO. Okay, and here now, okay. And then our results. All right, I hope this works because I haven't prepared this. So let's just see. Okay. Or maybe let me add a parameter here real quick. So here we add the user ID. And here now this is also a user ID, and this is then this user ID, and here I forgot the quotation marks. All right, so now this should work a bit better, I guess. And there we are. All right, so here, okay, default weather forecast stuff, but here's now our user response DTO with a list of characters. Nice. And here we can actually enter the user ID, hit execute. And of course, we get the data from the user database and then also all the data from the character database. And here, same stuff for our test user with Luigi. All right, so actually not very exciting stuff. We just have to do all that manually. But as you can see, this is how you can do it with two databases. The character database, for instance, or it's an application database, and also a user database. And when you have other apps, other databases, then you can still use, of course, the ID from that user database. You just have to actually handle this relationship manually. But inside of one context, of course, you can use all the entity framework magic, right? If you use code first migration or also database first migration, still works inside of one context, inside of one database. That entity framework is doing all that relationship management magic stuff. But across two database contexts, this is a bit different. Anyways, I hope you learned something, and if so, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button, maybe even subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much for that. Maybe consider subscribing to my newsletter for more tutorials in your inbox. And if you have any suggestions for other videos, please tell me that in the comments, and maybe you want to check out the video here on the screen. So see you in the next one. Take care.